The clock had stopped at 3:47 for as long as Rachel Chen could remember. It sat on her apartment's only shelf, a mahogany monstrosity with brass fittings that had turned green with age, glass face cracked in 3 places, hands frozen in perpetual afternoon. Her uncle Bernard had left it to her in his will, along with exactly nothing else, and her family had been making jokes about it for 6 months. Still keeping that piece of junk? Her sister Michelle's voice came through the phone, with that particular tone of sisterly condescension Rachel had learned to recognize at age 7. You could at least throw it out. It's depressing to look at. Rachel shifted the phone against her shoulder, stirring pasta on the stove with one hand. The apartment was tiny, a studio in the worst part of Oakland, where gunshots punctuated most Friday nights, and the landlord's idea of maintenance was leaving a note saying he'd get to it eventually. 800 square feet that cost $1,400 a month, which was why Rachel worked 3 jobs and still barely made rent. It was Uncle Bernard's. I'm keeping it. Uncle Bernard died broke in a nursing home. That clock is literally the only thing he owned. Mom says you're being sentimental about a man who never once remembered your birthday. That was technically true. Bernard Chen had been her father's younger brother, a man Rachel had met maybe 10 times in her 32 years. He'd worked as a watchmaker, never married, lived alone in a tiny apartment in San Francisco's Sunset District. At family gatherings, he'd sat in corners, speaking to no one, leaving early. When he died at 78, the family had been surprised to learn Rachel was his sole heir, then disappointed to learn the inheritance was a broken clock and $847 in a checking account that didn't even cover his cremation costs. Rachel's father had paid for the funeral. Her mother had complained about it for weeks. Typical Bernard, she'd said. Selfish, even in death. I have to go, Michelle. My pasta's burning. It wasn't, but Rachel needed her sister's voice out of her head. She ate dinner, standing at the counter, because the apartment was too small for a table, watching her reflection in the microwave door. 32 years old, 5'3", black hair she hadn't had time to cut in 4 months, dark circles under eyes that looked older than they should. She worked morning shift at a coffee shop, afternoon shift, doing data entry for a medical billing company, evening and weekend shifts, waiting tables at an Italian restaurant in Jack London Square. 65 hours a week, every week, and she was still $3,200 behind on rent. The eviction notice had arrived Tuesday, 30 days to pay or leave. She had $180 in her checking account and another $90 in cash tips hidden in a coffee tin. Her credit cards were maxed. Her car was 11 years old, with 170,000 miles, and a check engine light that had been on for 3 months. She had no family who would help, no friends with spare rooms, no safety net beyond the thin thread of employment that could snap at any moment. Rachel looked at the broken clock. Michelle was right. It was depressing. A reminder of a lonely old man who died forgotten, leaving behind nothing but a timepiece that didn't work and a legacy of isolation so complete that his own family barely mourned him. But Rachel remembered something the others had forgotten. She'd been 8 years old, visiting her father's family for Chinese New Year. The adults had been in the dining room playing mahjong, voices loud with competition and gossip. Rachel had wandered through the house bored, found Uncle Bernard in a back room, bent over a workbench with tiny tools and parts spread across the surface. What are you doing? She'd been at that age where questions came automatically, before self-consciousness taught you that some people didn't want to talk. Bernard had looked up, surprised to have company. Fixing a clock. See this gear? He'd held up something smaller than her fingernail. It controls how the hands move. Without it, time stops. Can you make it go again? Usually. But sometimes things are broken in ways you can't see. Hidden damage, internal failures. You have to take apart the whole mechanism to find the problem. Rachel had watched him work, fascinated by the delicacy of his movements, the patience required to manipulate things so small. After a while, Bernard had spoken again, voice quieter. People think time is simple. Tick-tock, forward march. But inside every clock is a universe of interconnected parts. Remove one piece, the whole system fails. Add the right piece back. Suddenly, everything works again. He'd shown her inside the clock he was repairing. The mechanism was beautiful. Gears and springs and jeweled bearings, all working in precise harmony. Magic, Rachel had breathed. Engineering, Bernard had corrected, but he'd smiled. That had been their only real conversation. At subsequent gatherings, Bernard had remained distant, uncomfortable with family dynamics. Rachel was too young to understand. But she'd remembered the clock, the gears, the idea that hidden mechanisms could transform broken things into working ones. Now, 24 years later, Rachel picked up the mahogany clock her uncle had left her. It was heavier than it looked, solid wood and brass fittings, craftsmanship from an era when objects were built to last generations. The crack in the glass face ran from 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock, like a lightning bolt frozen in time. The hands were ornate, black, metal shaped like leaves. The housing was nearly 2 feet tall and 8 inches deep, rectangular with carved details along the edges. She turned it over, looking for the mechanism access. There, on the back, a small brass panel held shut by 4 screws, so corroded they'd practically fused with the wood. Rachel found a screwdriver in her junk drawer, the only tool she owned, and began working the screws free. The first one stripped immediately, the head rounding out under pressure. The second broke off entirely. The third turned reluctantly, metal squealing against rust. The fourth wouldn't budge at all. Rachel sat on her bed, the clock in her lap, and felt tears threaten. She was so tired. 3 jobs, 65 hours a week, and she was still failing, still falling behind. Still 30 days from homelessness with no idea where she'd go or what she'd do when the eviction became real. The clock stared back at her with its cracked face and frozen hands, a perfect metaphor for her life. Broken, stuck, going nowhere. She thought about Michelle's voice. You could at least throw it out. But Rachel couldn't. Not because of sentiment exactly, but because throwing away the only thing Bernard had left felt like admitting that his whole life had been worthless. That working alone in a small apartment, fixing other people's broken timepieces for 50 years, added up to nothing. That dying with no mourners and no estate meant you'd never mattered at all. I'm not throwing you away, Rachel said to the clock. I'm not giving up on you. It was a promise to herself as much as to Bernard's memory. Rachel used pliers to grip the broken screw, twisted until her hands ached, and finally felt it give. The brass panel came free, and behind it, the clock's mechanism was revealed. Gears and springs and wheels, all frozen with age and lack of maintenance. And there, wedged behind the main gear, something that shouldn't have been there. Paper, folded small and yellowed with age. Rachel's heart kicked against her ribs. She pulled the paper free carefully, unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a note in Bernard's handwriting, shaky letters in blue ink. Rachel, if you're reading this, you cared enough to look inside. That means you're the right person. Behind the mechanism is a space. Press the brass plate at the bottom right corner twice, then once at top left. Time hides what patience reveals. The clock knows more than hours. Uncle Bernard. Rachel read it 3 times. The words made no sense, and perfect sense simultaneously. She looked back at the open mechanism, saw the brass plate Bernard mentioned, Pressed bottom right, twice. Once, top left. Nothing happened. Then she heard it. A soft click, barely audible. The brass plate shifted slightly inward. Rachel's hands trembled as she pulled it free. Behind it was a hollow space carved into the clock's wooden housing, perhaps 3 inches deep and 6 inches across. Inside was a piece of paper, folded into a small square and sealed with old tape that had turned brown with age. She unfolded it carefully. It was a property deed. 1247 Hollowbrook Road, Millbrook, Pennsylvania. 43 acres, including main house, outbuildings, and all contents therein. Deed holder, Bernard Chen. Transferred to Rachel Chen upon his death. Rachel stared at the document. Pennsylvania. She'd never been to Pennsylvania. Bernard had never mentioned owning property, certainly not 43 acres. The deed was dated 1985, nearly 40 years old. Property taxes were listed as paid through an escrow account, established with a law firm in Philadelphia. At the bottom of the deed, another note in Bernard's writing. The family never knew. I bought it with inheritance from my mother, your grandmother. They thought I wasted the money. I invested it in something that mattered. Go see what time has protected. Go see what patience preserves. There's more than house and land. Look for what's broken. Fix what needs fixing. You'll understand when you're ready. You're the only one who ever asked about the clocks. Rachel's vision blurred. She wasn't crying, not exactly, but her eyes burned with the effort of not crying. Bernard had left her property, 43 acres in Pennsylvania, a house, land, contents. It might be worthless. Old property in rural areas often was. The house could be condemned, uninhabitable. The land might be landlocked or contaminated. This could be another burden disguised as gift, another broken thing Bernard was passing on. But it was something. It was more than a frozen clock and $847. It was possibility. Rachel pulled out her phone, searched for Millbrook, Pennsylvania, small town in the Allegheny region, population 3,400, 2 hours north of Pittsburgh. She found the property on Google Maps, zoomed in on satellite view. Trees, dense forest, a gray roof barely visible among the canopy. No neighboring structures immediately visible. Remote, isolated. She looked at the eviction notice on her counter. 27 days remaining. Her next paycheck was $640 after taxes. Rent was $1,400. She was short nearly $2,000 with no way to earn it before the deadline. Rachel called her supervisor at the coffee shop. I need to take my vacation days. All of them. She'd been hoarding 5 days of paid time off for an emergency that had never quite emerged. When? Starting tomorrow. Rachel, we're short-staffed. Can you wait until… I'm sorry. I need to go now. It's a family emergency. After she hung up, Rachel called the medical billing company. The Italian restaurant told them the same story. Family emergency. Taking her days off. Be back in a week. She packed a duffel bag, 3 changes of clothes, toiletries, the broken clock, carefully wrapped in a sweater, the deed, her laptop, every dollar she had, the $180 in checking and $90 in cash. Her car's tank was a quarter full, which would get her maybe 80 miles. Gas money would have to come from her tips, which meant eating would have to wait. At midnight, Rachel Chen locked her apartment door, knowing she might return to find her belongings on the street, carried her duffel to the ancient Civic that wheezed when she started the engine, pulled up the GPS route to Millbrook, Pennsylvania, 28 hours of driving. She had 5 days off, $270 total, a broken clock that had revealed a secret, and a desperate hope that Bernard's final gift was more than another burden. The highway stretched east into darkness. Rachel drove through the night, caffeine pills keeping her alert, while the broken clock sat in the passenger seat, still frozen at 3:47, still holding whatever other secrets might be hidden in its silent mechanism. The drive consumed 3 days. Rachel slept in rest areas, rationing the protein bars she'd brought, spending as little as possible on gas. She crossed California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, finally, Pennsylvania. The landscape transformed from desert to plains to rolling hills thick with forest. Rain came and went. The Civic's check engine light flickered ominously, but the car held together. Towns grew smaller, sparser. Pittsburgh appeared and disappeared in the rearview mirror. Then 2-lane highways through Allegheny forests, where autumn leaves were beginning to turn, splashes of red and gold among the green. Millbrook arrived on the 3rd evening, a main street with perhaps 20 businesses, houses spreading up hillsides, white church steeples visible against darkening sky. Rachel followed GPS directions up increasingly narrow roads. Pavement gave way to gravel, gravel to dirt. Branches scraped the Civic's sides. After 15 minutes of climbing, the GPS announced she'd arrived. The gate was rusted iron, hanging open on broken hinges. A driveway beyond disappeared into forest, so thick the headlights barely penetrated. Rachel shifted into first gear, drove slowly forward, and after a quarter mile, the house emerged. It was massive. 3 stories of stone and timber, Gothic Revival architecture with steep gables and pointed arches, wrap-around porch with ornate columns, many cracked or broken. Windows, dozens of them, most boarded up or shattered. Ivy covered half the facade. Thick vines that looked like they were holding the structure together rather than decorating it. Rachel parked, killed the engine, sat, staring. This was what Bernard had hidden from the family for 40 years. This was the investment they'd mocked him for making, the waste of inheritance money they'd complained about. It should have been beautiful. Rachel could see that, beneath the decay, someone had built this house, with care, with resources, with vision. But time and neglect had transformed it into something out of a horror movie. She climbed out, legs stiff from days of driving. The air smelled like pine and decay, cold with approaching autumn. Twilight made everything gray and indistinct. The house loomed above her, 3 stories of abandonment and possibility. The front door was unlocked. Rachel pushed it open with a creak that echoed through empty spaces beyond. She turned on her phone's flashlight, stepped inside. The entry hall stretched before her, once elegant, now ruined. Hardwood floors warped with water damage, wallpaper peeling in long strips. A grand staircase curved upward into darkness. Furniture draped in stained sheets like ghosts waiting, dust thick enough to taste. Rachel walked slowly through the ground floor. Parlor with a fireplace large enough to stand in. Dining room with a table that must have seated 20. Kitchen with appliances from the 1970s, all dead and rusted. Study with built-in bookshelves, floor to ceiling, most books too damaged by moisture to salvage. Everywhere evidence of grandeur collapsed into decay. Everywhere ghosts of lives lived in rooms that had been empty for decades. She climbed the stairs carefully, testing each step. The 2nd floor held bedrooms, maybe 8 or 10, hard to count in the dim flashlight beam. Most were empty except for remnants of furniture too damaged to keep, too heavy to remove. One room had children's drawings still pinned to walls, faded but visible. Stick figures holding hands beneath a crooked sun. The 3rd floor was smaller, just 4 rooms. Servants' quarters, probably. Cramped spaces with slanted ceilings where eaves met walls. Rachel checked them quickly. finding nothing but dust and mouse droppings. She returned to the ground floor, exhausted, overwhelmed. This wasn't property, this was obligation. This was responsibility she had no resources to meet. The house needed hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs. The structure was probably unsound. She couldn't sell it in this condition, couldn't afford to restore it, couldn't afford to leave it. Bernard had left her another broken thing. Another timepiece frozen at 3:47. Mechanism ruined, purpose lost. Rachel sat on the front porch steps as darkness completed its arrival. She'd driven 3 days to find a burden, used her last cash on gas to reach a place that would consume whatever money she didn't have. Taken time off from jobs she'd probably lose for leaving without proper notice. Her phone buzzed. A text from Michelle. "Mom says you left town. Where did you go? Are you okay?" Rachel didn't answer. She wasn't okay. She was 32 years old, nearly homeless, exhausted, scared, and sitting on the steps of a mansion she couldn't save, left to her by an uncle who died alone after a life of fixing broken things that perhaps couldn't be fixed. The broken clock sat beside her on the steps. Rachel picked it up, looked at the frozen hands. 3:47. The note had said, "The clock knows more than ours." Bernard had hidden the deed inside. What else might be hidden? What other secrets might the mechanism hold? She carried the clock inside, found a room that seemed structurally sound, spread a sleeping bag she'd brought on the floor, used her phone's dying battery to search for information about the property, but found nothing. No recent sales, no tax liens, no public records beyond the basic deed. Morning came cold and grey. Rachel woke stiff, disoriented, took a moment to remember where she was. Pennsylvania, Millbrook, Bernard's house. Her house now, legally, if not practically. She walked the property in daylight. 43 acres of mixed forest and overgrown meadow. Outbuildings in various states of collapse. A barn with half its roof gone. A small structure that might have been a workshop or garage. Windows broken but walls still standing. A stone well house, pump, rusted solid. And everywhere, evidence of abandonment. This place had been closed up and forgotten for decades. Bernard had bought it in 1985 but apparently never lived here, never maintained it, never told anyone about it. Why? Rachel returned to the main house, began exploring more systematically, looking not just at the decay, but at what the house had been. In the study, she found notebooks in a desk drawer. Bernard's handwriting, entries dating from 1985 to 1990, mostly expense records, property tax payments, insurance, utility bills. Then, nothing after 1990. As if Bernard had simply stopped coming here. One notebook was different. Personal observations rather than finances. Rachel, read by window light, squinting at the faded ink. March 1985. Purchased the property today. 43 acres. Main house. Outbuildings. Family thinks I'm wasting my inheritance. Don't understand that I'm investing in something that matters more than their approval. This place has history. It has secrets. I'll spend my life protecting both. May 1985. House needs work, more than I can afford. But structure is sound, built to last. Reminds me of the old clocks. Good bones, just needs restoration. August 1985. Found the first evidence today. Hidden room behind the library shelves. Documents inside. Letters. Records. This changes everything. I understand now why I was meant to find this place. September 1985. Showing the property to potential buyers to restore it properly. They want to demolish everything, build something new. No regard for history, for preservation. I've decided. The house will stay as is, locked up, protected, until someone comes along who cares about more than profit. December 1985. Sealed the hidden room. Took all winter to document properly. Contents are extraordinary. I can't tell the family. They'd want to sell everything. Divide the value. Destroy what I'm trying to preserve. This will be my secret. My life's purpose. Protecting what needs protection until the right person finds it. The entries continued through 1990, growing more cryptic. References to additions to the collection. New discoveries. Protecting the legacy. Then, they stopped. Rachel understood. Bernard had found something in this house. Something valuable or historically important. Something he'd spent years protecting and documenting. Something he'd hidden so well that 40 years later, it remained concealed. And he'd left it all to her. The niece who'd asked about clocks. The only family member who'd shown interest in understanding what he did rather than dismissing it. Rachel stood in the study, notebook in hand, and felt the weight of Bernard's trust. He'd spent 40 years protecting secrets. Now those secrets were her responsibility. But where was the hidden room? Bernard mentioned library shelves. Rachel looked around the study. Bookshelves covered 2 walls, built-in, floor to ceiling. She approached them, running her hands along the wood, pressing, pulling, searching for the mechanism Bernard had mentioned. Nothing happened. The shelves were solid, immovable. She tried the other wall. Still nothing. Rachel sat back, frustrated. Maybe the room had been sealed so thoroughly it couldn't be found without demolishing walls. Maybe water damage had warped the mechanism beyond function. Maybe. Her phone rang. The coffee shop supervisor. Rachel, we need to talk about your absence. You didn't follow proper procedure for emergency leave. We're going to have to. I quit. The words came out before Rachel realized she was saying them. I'm sorry for leaving without notice, but I quit. Silence on the other end. Then, you understand this means you forfeit your last paycheck. Company policy for employees who quit without 2 weeks' notice. I understand. Rachel's voice stayed steady. Thank you for the opportunity. She hung up, stared at the phone. She'd just quit her morning job. The $640 paycheck she'd been counting on was gone. She had maybe $120 left total. No way to make rent even if she returned to Oakland tomorrow. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, Rachel felt something almost like relief. She'd been falling off a cliff in slow motion for months. Now, she'd let go. She was in free fall, but at least the waiting was over. Bernard's notebook sat open on the desk. Until someone comes along who cares about more than profit. Rachel cared. Not about profit, because there might not be any, but about understanding. About solving the puzzle Bernard had left. About proving that his life's work mattered. She picked up the broken clock, looked at it again. The clock knows more than ours. She'd found the deed inside. What else might be hidden? Rachel examined the mechanism more carefully. Behind where the brass plate had been, the hollow space that had held the deed, there was another panel. Smaller, tarnished, almost black. She pressed it experimentally. Nothing. Tried sliding it sideways. It moved, revealing another tiny compartment. Inside was a key. Old brass, ornate head, with initials carved into it. B.C. Bernard Chen. And beneath the key, another note. Library. Northwest corner. 3rd shelf from bottom. Book with broken spine. The key opens what time has locked. Rachel ran from the study to the library. She'd passed through it yesterday, barely noting the room. Now she looked carefully. Northwest corner. She oriented herself, found the right position. Third shelf from bottom. Books there. Most too damaged to read. Covers falling off. Pages stuck together with moisture and mold. Then she saw it. A book, with its spine literally broken, hanging at an angle. She pulled it free. Behind it, set into the wall, was a keyhole. So small she would have missed it if she hadn't been looking. Rachel inserted the key, turned it, heard a click that echoed through the empty house. Then, a section of the bookshelf, perhaps 4 feet wide and 7 feet tall, swung inward on hidden hinges. Behind it was darkness. Rachel turned on her phone's flashlight, stepped through the opening. The hidden room was perhaps 10 feet square. Stone walls, dry despite the moisture in the rest of the house, sealed against time. And covering those walls, filling shelves built into the stone, were documents, hundreds of them. Letters, photographs, ledgers, maps, all carefully preserved in acid-free sleeves and boxes. Rachel approached the nearest shelf, pulled out a box at random. Inside were letters dated 1932, written in various hands. She read the first one. "Dear Mr. Bernard, I cannot express my gratitude for the sanctuary your family provided. When I arrived with nothing, fleeing persecution, you gave me safety, time, resources. You asked nothing in return. The paintings I completed during my stay are enclosed as inadequate thanks. May you and your family be blessed for what you've done. F.H." Another letter. "To the Bernard family. 3 months in your home saved my children's lives. We had nowhere to go. You fed us, sheltered us, treated us with dignity when we'd been treated as less than human everywhere else. We've found work now in Chicago. My wife and I will never forget what you did for us. J.K." Letter after letter, all gratitude, all mentioning shelter, sanctuary, refuge, all from the 1932 and early 1940s. Rachel opened another box. Photographs, black and white images of the house, as it must have looked decades ago. Beautiful, maintained, full of life. And in those photos, people, dozens of them. Families, artists, children, all posed on the porch or in the gardens. Some looked prosperous. Others wore the haunted expressions of people who'd lost everything. A third box held a ledger. Rachel opened it carefully. The pages were filled with names, dates, notations. She read the first entry. Harold Finch, painter. Arrived October 1931. Departed December 1931. Provided studio space and materials. Completed series of 6 landscapes. Arranged gallery, showing in Philadelphia. Entry after entry, page after page. Over 100 people listed, maybe more. All of them sheltered here between 1931 and 1945. The Bernard family, whoever they were, had run a refuge during the Great Depression and World War II. They'd taken in artists, refugees, families who'd lost everything, given them sanctuary, asked nothing in return. And Bernard Chen, Rachel's uncle, had bought this property in 1985, found evidence of that history, and spent the rest of his life protecting it. Rachel sat on the floor of the hidden room, surrounded by documents that testified to extraordinary kindness during one of history's darkest periods. Her hands shook as she continued reading. Some of the names she recognized. Dorothy Ashworth, a writer whose novels Rachel had read in college. Victor Laurent, a composer whose symphony had premiered at Carnegie Hall. Harold Finch, a painter whose landscapes hung in museums. All of them had passed through this house. All of them had been saved here. The room grew darker as afternoon faded. Rachel's phone battery was at 8%. She had no electricity, no way to charge it, needed to conserve what power remained. But she couldn't stop reading, couldn't stop discovering the lives that had intersected in this place, the history Bernard had protected. Finally, at the bottom of one box, she found an envelope addressed to her, her name in Bernard's handwriting. Rachel opened it with trembling fingers. "Dear Rachel, if you've found this room, you've proven you have the patience and care I hoped you did. This house belonged to the Bernard family. No relation to me despite the name coincidence. They ran a sanctuary here from 1931 to 1945. Over 150 people passed through. Some stayed weeks, some stayed months. All of them received refuge when they had nowhere else to go. The Bernard family didn't do this for recognition. They did it because it needed doing. After the war, they closed the house, moved away, and the property eventually went to auction in 1985. I bought it because I saw what they'd built, saw the evidence of kindness nobody remembered. I spent 40 years documenting this history, tracking down survivors, collecting their stories, proving what happened here mattered. The documents in this room represent the most complete record of private sanctuary networks during the Depression and Holocaust that I know of. Universities have asked to purchase them. I've refused. This history belongs here, where it happened. But Rachel, there's more than documents in this house. The Bernard family didn't do this work with empty pockets. They had resources. Those resources are still here, hidden for the same reason I hid the documents: protection, preservation, until someone trustworthy could be found. Look for what's broken. I've left you clues. The clock was the first. There are others. Follow them. Find what I've protected. Then decide what to do with it. Sell it, keep it, use it to restore this house, and establish it as the memorial it deserves to be. That choice is yours. You asked about the clocks when you were 8. That told me you saw beneath surfaces, understood that complicated mechanisms hide inside simple facades. This house is a clock, Rachel. Gears within gears, secrets within secrets. Take it apart, carefully. Find what time has hidden. I'm sorry I never explained while I was alive. By the time I realized you were the right person, I was too old, too isolated, too uncertain how to bridge the distance. This is my apology and my trust. You're the only one who'll care enough to understand. With hope and faith in who you'll become, Uncle Bernard. Rachel read the letter 3 times. She was crying by the end, tears she couldn't control and didn't try to stop. Bernard had known her better than she'd known herself, had seen potential she'd forgotten existed, had left her not just property but purpose. The sun was setting, the hidden room growing dark. Rachel's phone battery was at 5%. She needed to preserve power, ration what little charge remained. Tomorrow she'd search for what else Bernard had hidden. Tonight she needed rest. But as she prepared to leave the room, something caught her attention. On the highest shelf, barely visible in the fading light, was another clock, larger than the one Bernard had left her in Oakland, but similar in style. Mahogany and brass, glass face intact, and the hands on this clock were moving. It was running. Rachel pulled it down carefully. The back panel was already open, mechanism visible, and there, tucked behind the gears, was another note. Workshop. Behind the false wall. Follow the ticking. Rachel's exhaustion vanished. She locked the hidden room, returned the key to the broken clock, carried it with her as she hurried outside. The workshop was the small outbuilding she'd noticed, the one with broken windows but standing walls. Inside, the space was empty, except for a workbench covered in years of dust and cobwebs. Rachel walked slowly around the perimeter, listening. And there, faint but distinct, she heard it, ticking, coming from the north wall. She pressed against the wall, searching for seams, mechanisms, anything that might indicate a hidden space. Her hands found a board that gave slightly under pressure. She pushed harder. Something clicked. A section of wall swung inward. Behind it was another room, maybe 6 feet deep, and inside that room, sitting on shelves, were clocks, dozens of them, all running, all ticking in slightly different rhythms that combined into a strange mechanical symphony. And beneath the clocks, carefully wrapped in cloth and stored in wooden crates, was gold, bar after bar of it. Old gold, stamped with dates from the 1,920 seconds and 30 seconds, weights marked in troy ounces. Rachel stopped breathing. She unwrapped one bar, lifted it. It had to weigh 5 pounds at least, heavy in a way that felt almost alive. She counted the bars visible on the nearest shelf. 20. 4 shelves visible. 80 bars minimum. Maybe more in the crates she couldn't see without moving things. At current gold prices, each bar was worth approximately $100,000. 80 bars. $8 million. Minimum. And judging by the size of the room, the number of crates stacked against the back wall, there might be twice that much. 3 times. Rachel couldn't process the numbers. They were too large, too impossible, too far removed from the $120 she had left to her name. She sank to the floor, gold bar in her lap, surrounded by ticking clocks that Bernard had left running, mechanisms marking time while protecting fortune that had waited decades for someone to find it. Bernard's note had said there was more than documents. This was what he'd meant. The Bernard family's resources, the money they'd used to fund their sanctuary operation, had been hidden here, protected, preserved, until someone trustworthy could be found. Someone like Rachel, who'd driven across the country to see what her uncle had left her, who'd opened a broken clock to find a deed, who'd cared enough to search for hidden rooms and follow cryptic clues left by a man who died believing his life's work mattered. Rachel sat in the workshop as darkness completed its arrival, holding a bar of gold worth more than she'd earned in the past 4 years, surrounded by enough wealth to transform everything, to pay her rent, to quit her jobs, to restore this house, to establish the memorial Bernard had wanted, to honor the Bernard family's sanctuary, to tell the stories that deserved telling, or to walk away, to sell it all and start over somewhere new, to let someone else deal with the responsibility. The clocks ticked around her, marking seconds, minutes, hours, time passing, while she decided who she wanted to be. Rachel thought about the letters she'd read, the people who'd passed through this house with nothing, receiving sanctuary from strangers who asked nothing in return. She thought about Bernard, spending 40 years protecting their legacy. She thought about herself at 8 years old, asking about gears and mechanisms, learning that hidden damage required patient investigation to understand and fix. Some things were broken in ways you couldn't see. Some damage was internal, requiring complete dismantling to repair. Some clocks stopped at 3:47 and stayed frozen for decades, holding secrets that only the right person at the right time could discover. Rachel Chen was 32 years old, nearly homeless, exhausted, and scared. But she was also holding $8 million in gold and standing in a workshop full of running clocks that her uncle had left her, along with a responsibility she was just beginning to understand. She wasn't giving up. She wasn't walking away. She was going to honor Bernard's trust, the Bernard family's legacy, the 150 lives that had been saved in this place. She was going to fix what was broken, starting with herself. The clocks ticked on. Time, patient and relentless, continued its forward march, and Rachel Chen began planning what came next. Rachel spent the night in the workshop, unable to leave the gold unguarded, even though logic said no one knew it existed. She sat with her back against the wall, the broken clock beside her, the running clocks ticking their irregular symphony around her. Sleep came in fitches, interrupted by adrenaline surges every time her brain remembered what she'd found. $8 million. Minimum. Maybe 12. Maybe 15. The numbers felt fictional. Her entire life had been measured in hundreds. Rent was $1,400. Paychecks were $640. Her savings account had never exceeded $3,200, achieved once after a particularly good month of tips, then immediately drained by car repairs. Now she was surrounded by wealth that existed in millions, plural, and her brain couldn't convert that into practical meaning. What did $12 million actually do? It paid rent, obviously. It fixed cars. It bought food without calculating cost per meal. But beyond survival needs, Rachel had no framework for understanding that kind of money. It existed in a realm occupied by other people, people who didn't work 3 jobs, people whose biggest financial decision wasn't whether they could afford both groceries and gas in the same week. Dawn came gray and cold. Rachel's body ached from sleeping on concrete. She stood carefully, joints protesting, and looked at the workshop in morning light. The gold was still there. Real. Solid. Impossible. She needed help. This wasn't something she could handle alone. But who could she trust? Her family would want to divide the inheritance, claim Bernard's estate should be shared among all relatives. Michelle would see dollar signs and start calculating her percentage. Her mother would have opinions about responsibility and family obligation that would somehow end with Rachel owing everyone else a cut. No, family was out. Rachel pulled out her phone, battery at 3%, and Googled attorneys in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Found one result. Robert Morrison, Estate and Property Law, office on Main Street. She took a screenshot before her phone died completely, then walked back to the main house. In daylight, the decay was even more obvious. Water damage had rotted sections of the porch. Several windows on the upper floors had lost their glass entirely, leaving gaping holes where birds nested. The front door hung slightly askew on hinges that needed replacing. This house required hundreds of thousands of dollars in restoration just to make it safe, let alone beautiful. But now Rachel could afford that, could afford architects and contractors and historical preservation specialists, could afford to do this right. The thought was dizzying. She changed into clean clothes from her duffel bag, used bottled water to wash her face and hands, tried to make herself look presentable. Then she drove the wheezing Civic down the mountain into Millbrook, following hand-drawn directions, since her phone was dead. The town looked different in daylight. Small, but not impoverished. Main Street had perhaps 20 businesses, a diner, hardware store, pharmacy, antique shop, real estate office. And there, between the pharmacy and a quilting store, a narrow building with a brass plaque. Robert Morrison, attorney at law. Rachel parked, sat in the car for a full minute trying to organize her thoughts, then walked inside. The reception area was small, decorated with landscape paintings and furniture that belonged in someone's living room rather than an office. An elderly woman at a desk looked up from her computer. "Help you? I need to see Mr. Morrison. About an estate matter. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but this is urgent. I inherited property here, and I've discovered complications." The woman studied Rachel's face, saw something there that made her expression soften. "Let me check if he's available." She disappeared through a door, returned a moment later. "Mr. Morrison can see you now." Robert Morrison was perhaps 60, gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was cluttered but organized. law books covering every wall, papers stacked in careful piles on his desk. He gestured to a chair. "I'm Rachel Chen. I inherited property from my uncle, Bernard Chen. The house on Hollowbrook Road." Morrison's eyebrows lifted. "The old Bernard estate? I didn't know anyone had inherited it. That property's been abandoned for decades. My uncle bought it in 1985, paid taxes through an escrow account. I only found out about it a few days ago when I discovered a deed hidden inside a clock he left me." She pulled out the deed, showed him. Morrison examined it carefully, nodded. "This appears legitimate. Property records show continuous ownership and tax payments. You're the heir?" "Yes. But there are complications." Rachel took a breath, made a decision. Morrison was a stranger, but Bernard had trusted him enough to use his firm for the escrow account. That had to mean something. "I found hidden rooms in the house, documents about a sanctuary operation during the Depression and World War II. Over 150 people were sheltered there. My uncle spent 40 years documenting the history. And I found—" She paused, suddenly uncertain how to say it. "I found gold, a lot of gold, hidden in the workshop, maybe $8 to $15 million worth." Morrison's expression didn't change for a long moment. Then he took off his glasses, cleaned them carefully, put them back on. "That's quite a discovery. I need legal advice about the property, the gold, what I'm required to report, who has claim to it. I don't know what I'm doing, and I can't afford to make mistakes." "Smart to come here first." Morrison pulled out a yellow legal pad, began taking notes. "Let's start with basics. The property is deeded to you, inherited from Bernard Chen. The gold was found on that property. If it was deliberately hidden there by previous owners and your uncle knew about it, which it sounds like he did, then it's legally part of the estate. You inherited it along with everything else." "What about taxes?" "Inheritance tax depends on the estate's total value. If we're talking 8 to 15 million in gold plus property, you're looking at significant tax liability. We'll need proper appraisals, estate valuation, probably file amended returns. But that's manageable with proper legal structure." Rachel felt relief begin to replace panic. This was fixable. Complicated, but fixable. "What about my family? They don't know about the gold. They think Bernard left me a broken clock and worthless property. If they find out, do they have legal claim to the estate?" "No. The will was clear. Everything to me." "Then they have no legal standing, regardless of what they think they deserve." Morrison's voice was firm. "This is your inheritance, your responsibility, your choice what to do with it. I want to restore the house, establish it as a historical site, honor what the Bernard family built and what my uncle protected. But I don't know how to start." Morrison smiled. "You start by letting me handle the legal framework while you focus on the history. First step is securing the property, making sure no one else tries to claim it. Second step is proper documentation of all assets. Third step is establishing the legal structure for whatever you want to build. Foundation, historical site, educational center, whatever serves your goals. How much will this cost?" "My retainer is $5,000. Total legal costs for estate this complex, probably $50,000 to $75,000. But that's easily affordable, given what you found." Rachel had $120 to her name. The gap between that and $5,000 was enormous. The gap between that and $75,000 was astronomical. Morrison saw her expression. "I can work on contingency initially. Payment, when the estate is properly settled and assets are liquidated. I've known about the Bernard estate for decades. Watched it sit empty, wondering what happened to it. If you're serious about honoring its history, I'll help you get there. I'm serious. Then we have an agreement. Morrison extended his hand. Rachel shook it, felt the weight of that handshake. She'd just committed to a path she couldn't fully see yet, trusting a stranger to guide her through legal territory she didn't understand. But she'd also committed to honoring Bernard's trust, to telling the stories that deserved telling, to fixing what was broken. They spent the next 2 hours outlining strategy. Morrison would file paperwork, establishing Rachel's claim, preventing any family challenges. He'd arrange for professional appraisers to document the gold. He'd connect her with historical preservation specialists and architects who understood restoration of properties like this. He'd structure everything to minimize tax liability while maintaining the estate's integrity. Rachel explained about the documents in the hidden room, the letters and photographs and ledger. Morrison's interest sharpened. That's potentially invaluable from historical perspective. We should contact universities, Holocaust museums, organizations that specialize in Depression-era history. They can authenticate, help with preservation, potentially provide funding for the memorial you want to establish. By the time Rachel left Morrison's office, she had a plan, or at least the skeleton of one. The details would come later, but the framework was there. Legal protection, professional documentation, expert assistance, pathway forward. She drove back to the estate, the Civic's check engine light now joined by a new warning indicator about oil pressure. The car was dying, probably had been for months. But soon, she'd be able to afford a mechanic. Soon, she'd be able to afford a new car. Soon, a Ford would stop being the primary calculation in every decision. The thought was still surreal. At the house, Rachel forced herself to eat protein bars and drink water, basic maintenance she'd been neglecting. Then, she returned to the hidden room in the library, carefully removing documents and spreading them across the study floor in chronological order. The story that emerged was extraordinary. The Bernard family, Samuel and Margaret, had begun their sanctuary operation in October 1931, just as the Depression reached its worst depths. Their first guest was Harold Finch, a painter who'd lost his gallery position and couldn't afford rent. They'd given him a room, a studio, materials, and time. He'd stayed 2 months, completed 6 landscapes, secured a gallery showing, left with gratitude and determination. Word spread quietly. Artists, writers, musicians, people whose work had no market during economic collapse, began arriving. The Bernards asked nothing in return. They provided rooms, food, community. Some guests stayed weeks, others months. Some contributed to household work, others focused entirely on their art. The Bernards imposed no requirements beyond basic respect and cooperation. By 1935, the operation had expanded. Families arrived, people who'd lost jobs and homes, who had nowhere else to go. The ledger showed children enrolled in local schools, adults receiving job training, connections made that led to employment in other cities. The Bernards functioned as combination employment agency, housing service, and community center. Then, in 1938, the nature of guests shifted. Names appeared in the ledger, with notations. Fled, Vienna. Family of 4. Hamburg, via New York. Berlin. Political persecution. The Bernards had begun sheltering Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi Germany. Rachel found letters from this period. Desperate gratitude for sanctuary, when most of America had closed its doors to refugees. The Bernards had taken risks, providing shelter when anti-Semitism was socially acceptable, when isolationism was national policy. They'd done it quietly, asking nothing, documenting everything. The operation continued through 1945, then abruptly stopped. The final ledger entry was dated August 1945. Victor Laurent, composer, departed for New York. Position secured with orchestra. House closing. Era ending. No explanation why. Just cessation. Rachel found a letter dated September 1945 from Margaret Bernard to her sister. The handwriting was shaky, grief evident in every line. Samuel died yesterday. Heart attack. Sudden. No warning. He was only 48. The house feels empty without him. I can't continue the work alone. It was our partnership, our shared purpose. Without him, I have no strength for it. I'm closing everything. Moving to Philadelphia to live with you. Let the house stand as memorial to what we built together. Let time protect what we no longer can. Rachel's eyes burned reading it. Samuel and Margaret Bernard had run their sanctuary for 14 years, helped over 150 people, asked for nothing, then lost everything when Samuel died. Margaret had sealed the house and walked away, unable to continue alone. The house had sat empty until 1985, when Rachel Chen bought it at auction. Her uncle had found this history, recognized its importance, spent 40 years protecting it. Now that responsibility was Rachel's. She photographed every document with Morrison's camera, creating digital backup. The physical originals needed professional preservation, climate-controlled storage, expert handling. But the stories could be shared immediately, testimonies of kindness during darkness. As afternoon faded to evening, Rachel heard a vehicle approaching. She tensed, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was, alone in an abandoned house, no phone service, no neighbors, within miles. The gold in the workshop represented enough value to justify violence from anyone who knew it existed. She grabbed a piece of broken wood that might serve as weapon, moved to the window, saw a pickup truck parking in the drive. An elderly man climbed out slowly, using a cane for support. He stood looking up at the house for a long moment, then started toward the front door. Rachel opened it before he could knock. The man stopped, surprised. "You're not Bernard Chen." "I'm his niece, Rachel. Bernard died 6 months ago. He left me the property." The man's expression softened. "Bernard died? I didn't know. I'm Walter Morrison, Robert's father. I worked on this place back in the 1982 when Bernard first bought it. Helped him with some repairs. He was a good man." Rachel stepped back, gesturing him inside. Walter walked through the entry hall slowly, looking around with something like reverence. "I remember when this house was full of life, back in the 30s and 40s, before I was born. But my father told me stories. The Bernards helping people. My father was one of them. Lost his job in 33, came here with nothing. Samuel Bernard gave him carpentry work, taught him skills, helped him get back on his feet." Rachel felt chills. "Your father knew Samuel Bernard?" "Knew him, owed him everything. My father always said Samuel saved his life, not by giving him money, but by giving him dignity. Work to do, skills to learn, purpose, when he'd lost all three." "Did your father ever talk about the house specifically, about what happened here?" Walter settled into a chair, leaning his cane against the armrest. "All the time. Used to tell me about the artists working in the upper rooms, families sharing meals in that dining room, children playing in the gardens. Said this place had magic. Not literal magic, but the kind that comes from people caring about each other without expecting anything back." Rachel showed him the ledger. Walter's hands trembled as he turned pages, reading names. Some of these people became famous. Dorothy Ashworth, the writer, Victor Laurent, the composer. But most didn't. Most were just regular folks, trying to survive hard times. My father said that's what made it special. The Bernards didn't help people because they might become important. They helped because people needed help. Do you know why Margaret closed the house after Samuel died? Walter nodded. Grief, mostly, but also practical. The sanctuary operation cost money. Samuel had family wealth, inheritance from his parents. He used it to fund everything. After he died, Margaret didn't have access to the same resources, and she was exhausted. 14 years of taking care of others without rest. When Samuel died, she finally let herself stop. He looked at Rachel directly. What are you planning to do with this place? Restore it. Establish it as historical site. Honor what the Bernards built. That'll take money. Hundreds of thousands. I found resources. Rachel didn't specify. Didn't mention the gold. Bernard left me more than just property. Walter studied her face, seemed to understand she wasn't saying everything. Bernard was protecting something. I knew that. He hired me to do repairs in 86, 87, but he never let me into certain rooms. Said they contained private materials. I respected that. Man's entitled to his secrets. He was protecting the Bernards' legacy. Documents, evidence of what happened here. He spent 40 years documenting it. Sounds like Bernard. He understood patience. Understood that some things need protecting until the right time. The right person. Walter paused. You're the right person? I'm trying to be. Walter stood slowly, retrieving his cane. I'm 87 years old. Don't have much time left. But if you're serious about restoring this place, I can help. Still got skills. Still remember how things were built. And I owe Samuel Bernard's memory that much. I can't pay you yet. Everything's tied up in legal process. Didn't ask for pay. Asked if you were serious. Walter moved toward the door. Come by my house tomorrow. I'll show you the original blueprints. My father kept copies when he worked here. They'll help with restoration. After he left, Rachel stood in the empty entry hall feeling less alone. Morrison for legal help. Walter for construction expertise. A framework of support forming around her impossible project. She returned to the workshop as darkness fell, checking the gold was still secure. Touched one bar, feeling its weight, its reality. This was what would make everything else possible. This was the Bernard family's legacy. Resources they'd used to fund their sanctuary operation, now available to rebuild what time had nearly destroyed. Rachel thought about Margaret's letter. The exhaustion of caring for others without rest. The grief of losing her partner. The decision to walk away rather than continue alone. Rachel understood that exhaustion, that loneliness. She'd spent years working 3 jobs, falling further behind. No partner to share the burden. No support system to catch her when she fell. She knew what it meant to be so tired you couldn't imagine continuing. But she also knew what it meant to find purpose. To discover you were capable of more than survival, that your life could matter in ways you'd stopped imagining possible. The clocks ticked around her, mechanical heartbeats marking time. Bernard had left them running, mechanisms maintained even while the house fell apart, reminding anyone who found them that time was patient, that what seemed broken might just be waiting for the right moment, the right hands, the right purpose to restore function. Rachel Chen was 32 years old, nearly homeless a week ago, nearly hopeless most of her life. Now she sat in a workshop full of gold, responsible for a house full of history, chosen by an uncle who'd seen something in her she'd forgotten existed. She wasn't giving up. She wasn't walking away. She was going to fix what was broken, starting with herself, extending to this house, expanding to the memorial these stories deserved. The clocks agreed, ticking their approval through the darkness. Morning brought Walter Morrison back, truck bed loaded with rolled blueprints and tools. His son Robert followed in a sedan. They spread the blueprints across the dining room table while Rachel made coffee on a camp stove she'd bought in town with the last of her cash. The blueprints showed the house as it had been in 1930. 3 stories, 23 rooms, state-of-the-art for the era. Electrical system, plumbing, heating, all designed for efficiency and comfort. The plans included details Rachel wouldn't have thought to check: load-bearing walls, foundation structure, drainage systems, roof pitch calculations. "Your uncle had me do a structural assessment back in '87, Walter explained. "Foundation is solid. Original builders used quality materials. The damage you see is mostly cosmetic. Water intrusion, neglect, wildlife. But the bones are good. She can be saved." Robert added legal perspective. "I've contacted a historical preservation specialist in Pittsburgh, Dr. Elizabeth Hammond. She's interested in touring the property, assessing the historical significance. If she validates what you've found, that opens funding possibilities. Grants, donations, institutional support. When can she come?" "This weekend, if you're available." Rachel was available. She had nowhere else to be, nothing else demanding her attention. Her entire life had narrowed to this house, this history, this responsibility. They spent the day assessing damage, prioritizing repairs. Walter pointed out sections of roof that needed immediate attention before winter. Windows that should be boarded properly to prevent further water intrusion. Foundation cracks that needed monitoring but weren't structural concerns. Robert photographed everything, creating documentation for insurance and legal purposes. He'd also brought a locksmith who changed all the exterior locks, providing Rachel with new keys and deadbolts that actually functioned. By evening, the house felt marginally more secure, still abandoned, still damaged, but beginning the transformation from derelict to protected. Walter left Rachel with a warning. "Word's going to spread that someone's here. That work's happening. Small town, people notice. Your family might hear about it. Let them." Rachel's voice was harder than she expected. "This is my inheritance, my responsibility." But that night, alone in the house with new locks and old ghosts, Rachel acknowledged the fear. Michelle would be furious when she learned about the gold. Their mother would claim Rachel had manipulated Bernard, demand the estate be divided. The family drama she'd driven across the country to escape would follow her here, manifesting in accusations and legal threats. Unless Rachel moved first, established the legal framework so thoroughly that challenges would be futile, proved the inheritance was legitimate, the property hers, the choices hers to make. She called Morrison's office early the next morning, using the landline phone that had been connected for liability purposes. "I want to accelerate everything. Estate settlement, property claims, asset documentation. How fast can we move?" "Depends on court schedules, but I can prioritize." "Why the urgency?" "My family's going to find out soon. I want legal protections in place before they challenge anything." Morrison understood. "I'll file an emergency petition for estate validation. Argue time sensitivity due to property deterioration and historical significance. Judge might fast-track it if we make compelling case." "Do it." Dr. Elizabeth Hammond arrived Saturday morning in a Subaru covered with university stickers. She was perhaps 50, gray hair in a practical bun, eyes that missed nothing. Walter had agreed to meet her there, provide context Rachel couldn't offer about the property's physical history. Rachel led them to the hidden library room, showed them the documents. Hammond's hands trembled as she examined the letters, the ledger, the photographs. "Do you understand what you have here?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "This is primary source documentation of private sanctuary networks during the Depression and Holocaust. We have so little of this. Most people destroyed records out of fear. All records were lost to time. This is complete, dated, authenticated by the participants themselves. She turned pages carefully, reading names. Victor Laurent stayed here. The Victor Laurent who premiered the Third Symphony at Carnegie Hall. According to the ledger, yes, 1,939 to 1,941. Dorothy Ashworth, 1,935. Hammond sat back, overwhelmed. This changes historical understanding of the period. We've known private networks existed, but documentation has been fragmentary. This proves organization, scale, sustained effort. This is extraordinary. Can you authenticate it? Officially? I'll need to bring in colleagues, cross-reference dates with other records, verify signatures. But preliminary assessment? This is authentic. No question. Relief flooded through Rachel. Official validation meant credibility. Meant the family couldn't dismiss this as Rachel's fantasy. Meant the Bernards' work would be recognized. Hammond spent hours photographing documents, taking detailed notes, making calls to colleagues. By late afternoon, she'd assembled a preliminary report. I'm recommending the university partner with you. We can provide funding for preservation, restoration, professional documentation. In exchange, we'd want research access, ability to publish findings, cooperative, educational programming. The house would remain mine. Legally, yes, but structured as foundation or trust with you as director. University contributes resources. You maintain control and vision. This protects historical integrity while providing sustainable funding. It was exactly what Rachel needed. Legal structure that protected her ownership while accessing resources she couldn't provide alone. Morrison had suggested similar framework, but having a major university offering support made it real. I'm interested. What's the next step? I'll present findings to the history department. We'll draft formal proposal. Probably need board approval given funding amounts, but I don't anticipate resistance. This is the kind of project universities exist for. After Hammond left, promising to return the following week with contracts, Rachel sat on the front porch with Walter. The old man looked tired but satisfied. You're really doing this? Actually, restoring the house. With help. I couldn't do it alone. Nobody does anything alone. That's what Samuel Bernard understood. People need each other. Support, community, shared purpose. Walter paused. My father said, that's what made the sanctuary work. It wasn't one man helping many. It was community helping itself. Guests contributed what they could. Artists taught classes. Musicians performed. Writers helped with correspondence. Everyone gave what they had. Rachel hadn't thought about it that way. The Bernards hadn't been saviors bestowing charity on grateful recipients. They'd created community where everyone contributed, where everyone mattered. That was the model she should follow. Not Rachel restoring a house through individual heroism, but Rachel building something where others could participate, contribute, find their own purpose in the shared work. The next week blurred together in meetings and planning. Morrison filed estate documents. Hammond assembled her university proposal. Walter began recruiting contractors who understood historical restoration. Rachel coordinated everything, learning on the fly how to manage projects she barely understood. And through it all, she avoided her family, didn't return Michelle's calls, ignored her mother's texts, asking where she was, what she was doing. Let them wonder while she built foundations they couldn't undermine. But Thursday afternoon, a car pulled up the drive. Rachel recognized it immediately. Michelle's white Mercedes, immaculate and expensive. completely wrong for dirt, mountain roads. Her sister climbed out, designer clothes and perfect makeup, incongruous against the abandoned mansion backdrop. Rachel met her on the front porch. "So, this is where you've been hiding." Michelle's voice carried accusation and amazement in equal measure. "Mom's been worried sick. You quit your jobs, disappeared, stopped answering calls. We thought something happened to you." "I'm fine. Dealing with Uncle Bernard's estate." Michelle looked at the house, at the broken windows and peeling paint, and laughed. "This is the big inheritance? Rachel, this place is a dump. It's worthless. Uncle Bernard left you a problem, not a solution. You don't know what you're talking about. I know real estate. This property would cost more to restore than it's worth. You should sell it for land value. Take whatever you can get. Move on." Rachel felt anger rise, hot and clean. "I'm not selling. Don't be stupid. You can't afford to keep this place. You were $3,000 behind on rent in Oakland. You worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. Now you're going to restore a mansion?" Michelle's voice dripped condescension. "Be realistic." "I am being realistic. I'm restoring the house, establishing it as historical site, honoring what Uncle Bernard protected." "With what money?" Rachel almost told her, almost revealed the gold, the millions hidden in the workshop. But something stopped her. Once Michelle knew, the whole family would know, and they'd find ways to claim it, to argue Rachel wasn't competent to manage that wealth, to petition courts for division of assets. No, better to keep the secret until legal protections were absolute. "I have resources and university support. It's handled." Michelle studied her sister's face, seeing something new there. Determination, maybe. Or stubbornness. "Mom's not going to like this. Uncle Bernard's estate should benefit the whole family, not just you. Uncle Bernard's will was clear. Everything to me. The family has no legal claim." "Legal and right aren't the same thing. We're your family, Rachel. We deserve consideration. The family threw me out when I needed help." Rachel's voice stayed level despite anger beneath. "When I was behind on rent, when I asked to borrow money, you said I needed to manage my finances better. Mom said I made my own choices. Nobody offered help. Nobody cared if I ended up homeless." Michelle flinched. "That's not fair." "It's completely fair. Now I've inherited something valuable, and suddenly I'm supposed to share. Suddenly family matters. No, this is mine. Uncle Bernard gave it to me. I'm honoring his trust. You're making a mistake. Then it's my mistake to make." Michelle left without another word. Rachel watched the Mercedes navigate the dirt road too fast, kicking up dust, disappearing into trees. The confrontation had been inevitable. At least, now, it was done. But Rachel knew this wasn't over. Michelle would tell their mother, and together, they'd strategize. Legal challenges, family pressure, guilt trips about obligation and fairness. The attacks would come, varied and persistent. Rachel needed to be ready. She called Morrison immediately. "My sister found me. Once the estate divided, can she challenge the will?" "On what grounds?" Bernard was mentally competent. "The will is clear. She'll claim, I manipulated him, exerted undue influence." "Did you?" "I saw him maybe 10 times in my life. Talked to him twice. We weren't close." "Then she has no case. Courts require proof of undue influence. Mere suspicion isn't enough." Morrison paused. "But I'll accelerate the estate validation. Better to have everything finalized before family drama escalates." That afternoon, while Walter worked on boarding up broken windows, Rachel returned to the workshop. The gold sat unchanged, fortune waiting to transform everything. She photographed several bars, sent the images to Morrison for appraisal purposes. His response came within hours. Based on these images and current market rates, preliminary estimate is $14.2 million. I'm arranging professional appraisal next week. Also contacted bank about secure storage. You can't keep this in a workshop with broken locks. $14 million. The number had grown more specific, more real. Rachel tried to imagine what that meant practically. How many years of rent it represented. How many meals, how many car payments, how many medical bills it could cover. The arithmetic defeated her. Too many zeros. Too far removed from the calculations that had governed her life. But she understood what it meant for the house. Complete restoration. Professional architects. Historical accuracy. Educational programming. Everything the Bernards' legacy deserved. And maybe, quietly, security for herself. An apartment that didn't threaten eviction. A car that didn't flash warning lights. The ability to work one job instead of 3. To sleep 8 hours instead of 4. To live instead of just surviving. The possibility felt dangerous, like hoping for rescue when experience had taught that rescue didn't come. But the gold was real. The university partnership was forming. The legal framework was solidifying. Despite everything Rachel had learned about the unreliability of hope, despite every lesson about trusting nothing, she felt something unfamiliar emerging. Not hope exactly. Something more cautious. Call it possibility. The idea that maybe, this time, the broken thing could actually be fixed. The clocks ticked around her, patient mechanisms, marking time, while Rachel decided who she wanted to become in the space between finding fortune and figuring out what it meant. The appraiser arrived on Tuesday, a serious woman named Dr. Rachel Chen, no relation, who specialized in precious metals and historical valuations. Morrison had hired her from Philadelphia, emphasizing discretion and expertise in equal measure. She spent 4 hours in the workshop, examining each gold bar with jeweler's tools and electronic testing equipment, documenting weights, purity, mint marks, dates. Rachel watched from the doorway, unable to stay away, even though her presence served no purpose. Each bar Dr. Chen logged felt like another layer of impossibility, becoming concrete reality. Finally, the appraiser closed her laptop and removed her magnifying glasses. Preliminary assessment complete. I'll provide detailed written report within 48 hours, but I can give you numbers now if you'd like. Please. Dr. Chen consulted her notes. 217 bars total. Weights range from 4.8 to 5.3 troy ounces. Average purity, 99.5%. Most are stamped with dates between 1925 and 1938. Current gold spot price is approximately $1,900 per ounce. She paused, letting Rachel absorb the numbers. Total estimated value, $198.4 million. The world tilted. Rachel grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. That's not. You said $14 million. Mr. Morrison's estimate was based on photographs of a small sample. I've now examined the complete collection. Dr. Chen's voice stayed professionally neutral. The crates stacked in the back contained significantly more than was initially visible. This is one of the largest private gold holdings I've documented outside of institutional vaults. $198 million. The number was so large it lost meaning entirely. Rachel couldn't convert it to anything comprehensible. It existed in a realm beyond understanding, beyond any framework her life had provided for processing financial information. Are you certain? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I've triple-checked every calculation. Unless market prices shift dramatically before you liquidate, this valuation is accurate within 2% margin of error. Dr. Chen began packing her equipment. Mr. Morrison mentioned, You're planning to use these funds for historical preservation. Yes, restoring this house, establishing a memorial. That's admirable. Most people who discover this kind of wealth immediately think about personal enrichment. You're choosing legacy over luxury. She paused at the door. The Bernard family must have been extraordinary people to accumulate this much wealth and then use it to help others, rather than hoarding it. After Dr. Chen left, Rachel sat on the workshop floor, surrounded by 217 gold bars worth nearly $200 million, trying to understand what had just happened to her life. Yesterday, she'd been a 32-year-old woman who worked 3 jobs and couldn't make rent. Today, she had access to wealth that exceeded most people's lifetime earnings by factors of thousands. The transformation was so complete, so absolute, it felt fictional, like she'd stepped through a portal into someone else's existence. Her phone, now charged via a generator Walter had installed, buzzed with a call from Morrison. Dr. Chen just sent preliminary numbers. His voice held barely controlled excitement. Rachel, this changes everything. Estate tax liability alone will be roughly $80 million, but you'll still net over $100 million after all expenses. That's enough to restore the house 10 times over, establish endowment for permanent operations, fund education programs, everything. I don't understand how to manage that much money. You hire people who do. Financial advisors, investment managers, accountants. They'll help you structure everything to minimize taxes, maximize impact, ensure sustainable funding for whatever vision you want to pursue. Morrison paused. But Rachel, you need to be careful. Once this becomes public knowledge, and it will eventually, people will come out of the woodwork. Distant relatives claiming they deserve a share. Scam artists with investment schemes. Charities requesting donations. Everyone wanting a piece. What should I do? First, we finalize estate validation immediately. I'm filing emergency motion for expedited hearing. Second, we establish trust structure with you as sole beneficiary and director. Third, we arrange secure banking. Move the gold to a vault. Get it off the property. Fourth, we prepare for publicity, because this story will leak, and when it does, media will descend. Rachel's stomach tightened. Can't we keep it quiet? Not forever. Too many people involved now. Dr. Chen, the bank, university officials, contractors. Someone will talk. Better to control the narrative than let it control you. They spent the next hour planning. Morrison would handle all legal and financial arrangements. Rachel would focus on the historical documentation, working with Dr. Hammond to prepare public presentation of the Bernard's sanctuary operation. The gold discovery would be framed as funding source for historical preservation rather than personal windfall. Emphasize the legacy, not the wealth, Morrison advised. Position yourself as steward of history rather than lottery winner. That protects you from some of the backlash. After the call ended, Rachel walked through the house, seeing it with new understanding. This wasn't just a mansion that needed restoration. This was a project she could actually complete, properly, beautifully, without compromise. She could hire the best architects, use period-appropriate materials, restore every detail to historical accuracy. And beyond the house itself, she could build what the Bernards had built. Not a physical sanctuary that was different now, but an educational center. A place where people could learn about private networks of resistance during dark times, where the 150 names in that ledger would be remembered, honored, their stories told. Rachel thought about Bernard's letter. You're the only one who'll care enough to understand. He'd been right. The family would have sold everything, divided the money, moved on. Only Rachel cared about the history, about making sure the Bernards' work mattered beyond financial value. That evening, Walter arrived with his grandson. a contractor named James Morrison. Apparently, everyone in Millbrook was either named Morrison or related to someone who was. James was 40-something, competent and quiet, and he spent 2 hours surveying the house with professional intensity. Restoration is feasible, he concluded. Expensive, but feasible. I'd estimate 18 months of work, $2 million in costs. That includes structural repairs, updated systems, historical accuracy in all restoration. We'd need to bring in specialists for some aspects, but I can manage the general contracting. How soon can you start? James exchanged glances with his grandfather. You're serious about this? You have funding secured? I have funding. Rachel didn't specify amounts. I want this done right. Period-appropriate materials, historical accuracy, no shortcuts. Then I can start in 2 weeks. Need time to pull permits, order materials, assemble crew. But once we begin, we'll work steadily until completion. They shook hands. Rachel had just committed to a $2 million restoration project with the casual certainty of someone who'd grown up wealthy. Except she hadn't. She'd grown up calculating whether she could afford both shampoo and soap in the same grocery trip. The disconnect was surreal. After they left, Rachel called Dr. Hammond. The gold appraisal came back. $198 million. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, that's extraordinary. It changes what's possible. For the restoration, the memorial, everything. I want to do this comprehensively. Full academic partnership, educational programming, research center. Whatever it takes to honor the history properly. The university will be very interested in partnering at that funding level. Hammond's voice carried barely suppressed excitement. I'll schedule meeting with the board president, development office, relevant department heads. We can create something truly exceptional here. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She lay in her sleeping bag on the study floor, staring at shadows cast by moonlight through broken windows, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. 1 week ago, she'd been counting her last dollars, wondering where she'd go when eviction became reality. Now she had access to wealth that exceeded anything she'd imagined possible. The transformation was so complete, it felt like 2 different people had lived those experiences. But underneath the numbers, underneath the impossible fortune, the core question remained. Who was Rachel Chen going to be now that survival was no longer the primary calculation? She could walk away, take the money, sell the property, start over somewhere new with resources to build any life she wanted. The house and its history weren't her responsibility. Bernard had left her a gift, not an obligation. But that felt like betrayal. Bernard had trusted her to care when others wouldn't, to understand what mattered beyond profit, to fix what was broken not because it was easy, but because it needed fixing. And the Bernards themselves, Samuel and Margaret, who'd spent 14 years helping strangers, asking nothing in return, building something extraordinary that had been forgotten. Their story deserved telling. The 150 people who'd passed through this house deserved remembering. Rachel thought about the letters she'd read, the gratitude expressed by people who'd received sanctuary when they had nowhere else to go. The lives that had been saved, literally and figuratively, by strangers who cared enough to help. What would she do with nearly $200 million? She could restore the house, yes, establish the memorial, fund educational programs. That would consume maybe $20 million over time, leaving an enormous fortune she had no framework for understanding. The magnitude was paralyzing, so Rachel forced herself to think smaller. What would she do tomorrow? Next week? What were the immediate steps that would move her toward a purpose she could articulate? First, secure the gold. Morrison was arranging vault storage, but until then, she needed better protection. James had mentioned security systems during his survey. Rachel would have him prioritize that. Second, continue documenting the historical materials. Dr. Hammond was organizing that work, but Rachel could assist, ensuring nothing was lost or damaged. Third, begin the restoration. Not just hiring contractors, but participating, understanding what was being built, maintaining connection to the physical reality of the project. Fourth, figure out the rest later, one step at a time. That was how you climbed mountains, fixed clocks, restored mansions, honored legacies. Not through grand vision, but through persistent incremental progress. Rachel finally slept, exhausted by wealth she hadn't asked for and responsibility she'd chosen to accept. Friday morning brought Michelle again, this time with their mother. Rachel heard the cars before she saw them. Michelle's Mercedes, followed by their mother's Lexus. Both vehicles absurdly wrong for mountain dirt roads. She met them on the front porch, determined to control this confrontation. Her mother, Rachel Chen, climbed out slowly, dressed as if attending a business meeting rather than visiting an abandoned house. Her expression was carefully neutral, the face she used when preparing for negotiations. Rachel, your sister tells me you've been hiding here for 2 weeks, refusing to communicate with your family. I wasn't hiding. I was settling Uncle Bernard's estate. By yourself, without consulting anyone. Patricia walked closer, assessing the house with visible distaste. This property is worthless. Restoration would cost more than it's worth. The responsible action is to sell it, divide the proceeds, move on. I'm not selling. Don't be childish. You can't afford to maintain this place. You were behind on rent in Oakland. You have no savings, no resources. This is fantasy, not planning. Rachel felt the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. Her mother's dismissiveness, the assumption that Rachel couldn't manage her own decisions, the condescension wrapped in concern. For years, she'd accepted that treatment, internalized it, believed she deserved nothing better. But something had changed. Maybe finding the gold, maybe Morrison's legal support, maybe just exhaustion, with being treated as incompetent by people who'd never offered actual help. I have resources. The estate is larger than you understand. Patricia's expression sharpened. What does that mean? Rachel made a decision. They'd find out, eventually. Better to control the revelation than have them discover it through rumors. Uncle Bernard left more than just the house. He left documentation of a sanctuary operation that ran here from 1931 to 1945. Historical materials worth preserving. And he left funding to make that preservation possible. What kind of funding? Michelle's voice carried suspicion. Enough. That's all you need to know. Rachel, I'm your mother. You can't shut me out of major financial decisions. If Bernard left money, the family deserves transparency. The family deserves nothing. Bernard's will was explicit. Everything. To me. No conditions, no requirements to share. Patricia's professional mask slipped, revealing anger beneath. That will can be challenged. Undue influence, diminished capacity, improper execution. I've consulted attorneys. We have grounds. Challenge it then. Rachel's voice stayed level. Waste your money on legal fees. You'll lose. Bernard was mentally competent. I never visited him, never communicated with him beyond childhood encounters. There's no evidence of manipulation, because none occurred. The court will decide that. The court already did. Emergency estate validation hearing was yesterday. Judge reviewed all evidence, interviewed Bernard's nursing home staff, examined medical records. Will was validated. Estate is legally mine. Rachel hadn't mentioned that hearing to anyone outside Morrison's office. hadn't given her family opportunity to intervene or attend. Morrison had advised speed and discretion, and she'd followed his guidance. Patricia's face went rigid. "You had a hearing without notifying the family." "I had a hearing regarding my inheritance. The family has no legal standing." "We'll see about that." Patricia turned toward her car, then stopped. "You're making a mistake, Rachel. Family matters. Whatever money Bernard left should benefit everyone, not just you. Family matters when it's convenient." Rachel's anger finally broke through her careful control. "Where was family when I needed help? When I was working 3 jobs and still couldn't make rent? When I asked to borrow money and was told I needed to budget better? When I faced eviction and nobody offered to help? We offered advice. Advice isn't help. Advice is judgment wrapped in concern. What I needed was assistance, and nobody provided it. Now I've inherited something valuable, and suddenly family matters? No. You don't get to claim rights to something you'd have dismissed if it had been worthless. You're being selfish." "I'm being honest. Uncle Bernard gave this to me because I was the only one who cared about his work rather than his wealth. The only one who'd honor what he protected. You're proving him right." Michelle grabbed their mother's arm. "Let's go. She's clearly made up her mind." They left. Rachel watched the cars disappear, hands shaking with adrenaline. The confrontation had been worse than she'd anticipated, and better than she'd feared. They knew she had money now, even if they didn't know how much. They'd try other approaches, other pressures, but the legal framework was solid. Morrison had ensured that. She called him immediately to report the encounter. "They'll escalate," he warned. "Expect social media posts about ungrateful daughters, family members claiming you manipulated Bernard, possibly media interviews painting you as villain. That's typical when someone inherits wealth family members think they deserve. How do I protect against that? Ignore it mostly. Don't respond publicly. Don't engage. Let your actions speak louder than their words. When the restoration is complete, when the memorial opens, when people see what you've built, the accusations will look petty in comparison." That afternoon, a security company arrived to install comprehensive systems, cameras covering all approaches, motion sensors, reinforced locks, central monitoring station. James had recommended them, and Rachel paid their $15,000, quote, without hesitation, still adjusting to the reality that money was no longer the limiting factor in decisions. The gold was scheduled for transfer to secure vault storage on Monday. An armored truck would arrive with guards, documentation would be processed, and $198 million would move from a workshop with broken windows to climate-controlled safety with insurance and protection. Rachel couldn't provide herself. Sunday brought Dr. Hammond and 3 university colleagues, historians specializing in Depression-era America, Holocaust studies, and preservation architecture. They spent hours examining documents, taking notes, photographing everything with professional equipment. One of them, a Holocaust historian named Dr. David Rothstein, read through the letters from Jewish refugees, with tears streaming down his face. "My grandmother came through New York in 1939, he said quietly. She spent weeks trying to find anyone who'd help her family get settled. Most doors closed in her face. She always said there were a few righteous people who made the difference between survival and catastrophe. This was one of those places." He looked at Rachel. "These stories need to be public. They're not just historical documents. They're testimonies of human decency during a period when decency was rare. Publishing them, teaching them, that's not optional. That's obligation." "That's exactly what I want to do," Rachel assured him. "Make this a place where people learn about private resistance, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about how individual actions matter, even during overwhelming darkness. Dr. Rothstein nodded. Then you'll have my full support, and I know others who'll want to participate. This is important work. By evening, the university team had completed preliminary assessment. Dr. Hammond presented their proposal. Formal partnership. University contributing $2 million toward restoration, in exchange for educational programming rights, research access, and co-branding. The Samuel and Margaret Bernard Center for Historical Study, jointly operated by Rachel's Foundation and the university's History Department. Rachel accepted immediately. The partnership provided institutional credibility she couldn't build alone, academic expertise to ensure proper scholarship, and sustainable operational structure once the memorial opened. Monday morning, the armored truck arrived right on schedule. Rachel watched guards carefully load 217 gold bars into reinforced containers, document every piece, secure everything for transport to Philadelphia's most secure private vault. Dr. Chen had coordinated the transfer, ensuring every regulatory requirement was met, every form properly filed. As the truck pulled away, Rachel felt strange lightness. The gold was gone, but the wealth remained now existing as numbers in accounts rather than physical bars in a workshop. Somehow, that made it more real, more like something she could actually use rather than something she was just protecting. Morrison called that afternoon with banking updates. Accounts are established. I've transferred initial operating funds $10 million for restoration, $5 million for immediate expenses, remainder staying in various investment vehicles until you decide long-term allocation. Financial advisor wants to schedule call this week, discuss wealth management strategy. $10 million for restoration. The number that would have seemed impossible a week ago now felt almost modest given the total fortune available. Rachel was already thinking in millions, already recalibrating her sense of scale. The adjustment was disorienting. But the work ahead provided anchor. Restoration would begin next week. Contractors, architects, craftspeople, all converging to transform decay back into beauty. Rachel would be present for every decision, understanding every choice, maintaining connection to the physical reality of what was being built. Because at its core, this wasn't about money. Money was tool, not purpose. The purpose was honoring the Bernards' legacy, telling the stories that deserved telling, creating something that would outlast her own life. Wednesday brought unexpected visitor. An elderly woman arrived in a sedan, driven by someone younger, perhaps her daughter. Rachel met them at the door. "I'm Ruth Adler," the old woman said. Her voice was thin but determined. "I stayed in this house in 1938 with my parents and sister. We were refugees from Vienna. The Bernards saved our lives." Rachel's breath caught. "Please, come in. I've read about your family in the ledger. Adler family. Arrived October 1938. Departed February 1939. Ruth's eyes widened. "The ledger still exists?" "Everything exists. Letters, photographs, detailed records. Your family's story is documented." They moved to the study, where Rachel had been organizing materials. Ruth examined the ledger entry about her family with shaking hands, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I've spent 86 years trying to find information about this place, trying to thank the Bernards for what they did, but they'd disappeared. The house was abandoned. I thought the history was lost. It's not lost. My uncle protected it for 40 years. Now, I'm making sure people know what happened here." Ruth looked around the damaged room, at the water-stained walls and broken windows. "You're going to restore it?" "Completely. and establish it as memorial and education center, the Bernard Center for Historical Study, opening in 18 months. Will my story be part of it? If you're willing to share it, yes. All the stories should be told. Ruth's daughter, Sarah, spoke up. Mom's been waiting her whole life to properly thank the Bernards, to make sure people know what they did. She tried for years to find them, but records were lost. The family had moved. She thought she'd die without ever acknowledging the debt. Rachel showed them the collection of letters, found the one from Ruth's father, thanking the Bernards, expressing gratitude for sanctuary when his family had nowhere else to go. Ruth read it, sobbing, holding physical evidence of her father's gratitude, 76 years after he'd written it. "Can I testify?" Ruth asked. "When you open the memorial, can I tell people what the Bernards did for us?" "I'd be honored if you would." They spent 2 hours together, Ruth describing her memories of the house, the gardens, the yellow wallpaper in the bedroom she'd shared with her sister, the kindness Samuel and Margaret had shown, treating refugee children like valued guests rather than charity cases, the way they'd helped her father find work, supported her mother through trauma, given the family time to heal and rebuild. "This house gave us back our humanity," Ruth said. "We'd been treated as less than human in Vienna, during our escape, even after we arrived in America. But here, the Bernards saw us. Really saw us. Treated us like people who mattered. That's what I want people to understand. They didn't just give us rooms and food, they gave us dignity." After Ruth and Sarah left, Rachel sat alone in the study, holding the letter Ruth's father had written. The words had survived nearly 8 decades, preserved because Rachel Chen had cared enough to protect them. Now they'd be shared, teaching new generations about kindness during darkness, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. This was why the money mattered, not for Rachel's personal enrichment, though security was welcome after years of struggle, but because it made possible the memorial these stories deserved. Because it let her honor the Bernards, Bernard, and the 150 people whose lives had intersected in this place. The next weeks blurred together in logistics and planning. Contractors began work, stabilizing the structure before comprehensive restoration. Architects finalized designs, ensuring period accuracy while incorporating modern safety requirements. Dr. Hammond's team cataloged historical materials, creating digital archives while protecting physical originals. And Rachel managed it all, learning skills she'd never needed before. Project management, budgeting at scales she'd never imagined, coordination between multiple teams with competing priorities. She was exhausted every night, exhilarated every morning, discovering capabilities she'd never had opportunity to develop. Morrison handled financial matters, ensuring money flowed smoothly to wherever it was needed. The wealth was almost absurd in its abundance. Every expense seemed modest compared to the fortune available. Rachel authorized purchases without the calculations that had governed her life, buying quality materials and hiring expertise without compromise. But she was careful too. The foundation Morrison established had governance structure, accountability measures, long-term sustainability planning. This wasn't windfall to be squandered, but legacy to be protected for generations. Michelle appeared one more time, 3 weeks after their confrontation. She arrived alone, without their mother, looking uncertain rather than angry. "Can we talk?" Rachel gestured to the porch steps. They sat in silence for a moment, watching contractors work on the roof. "Mom hired a lawyer," Michelle said finally. He told her challenging the will would be expensive and almost certainly unsuccessful. So, she's dropping it. Good. But Rachel, I want to apologize for dismissing what you're doing here. I was wrong. Michelle's voice carried genuine regret. I saw a broken house and assumed that's all it was. I didn't look deeper, didn't care about the history, didn't understand what Uncle Bernard was protecting. Why the change? I did research after our fight. Found articles about private sanctuary networks during the Depression and Holocaust. Learned how rare documented evidence is, how important this history is. And I realized you were right. Some things matter more than money. She paused. I spent my whole life focused on wealth accumulation, career advancement, status markers. I'm 40 years old, and I can't point to anything I've done that actually matters. You're 32, and you're building something that'll outlast both of us. Rachel studied her sister's face, seeing vulnerability she'd rarely witnessed before. I don't need your approval, Michelle, but I'd welcome your support. What can I do? The memorial will need funding beyond initial restoration, operational budget, programming costs, maintenance. If you wanted to contribute, establish a scholarship in the family name that would honor Uncle Bernard and the Bernards who built this place. Michelle nodded slowly. I'll do that. 100,000 annually for students studying history, social justice, humanitarian work, the Chen Family Scholarship. That would mean a lot. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. The relationship wasn't repaired, too much hurt, too many years of distance and disappointment. But it was something, a beginning of bridge where wall had been. After Michelle left, Rachel called Morrison with an update. Your sister's scholarship is generous, he noted. But Rachel, you should think about your own future too. You've allocated $20 million to the memorial project. That leaves over $100 million. What do you want to do with it? Rachel hadn't let herself think that far ahead. I don't know yet. You could retire, never work again, travel, pursue hobbies, do whatever you want. I don't want to retire. I'm 32. Then what do you want? Rachel looked around the study, at the restoration happening around her, at the work giving her life purpose she'd never experienced before. I want to keep doing this, not just here, but other places. Find forgotten histories, protect them, tell stories that deserve telling. There must be other private sanctuary networks whose documentation is gathering dust somewhere, other legacies that need honoring. That's ambitious. I have the resources now, and I've learned skills that transfer. If I could figure out how to restore this place, I can do it elsewhere. She paused. Start a foundation dedicated to preserving forgotten humanitarian histories. Fund research, documentation, memorial projects. Make sure people like the Bernards don't disappear from memory. Morrison's voice carried approval. That's good use of wealth. Sustainable, meaningful, scalable. I'll help you structure it properly. 3 months into restoration, the house was transformed. The roof was complete, solid, and weatherproof. Windows were replaced with period-appropriate glass. The foundation was reinforced, drainage improved. Interior work had begun, restoring plaster walls, refinishing floors, updating electrical and plumbing while maintaining historical character. Rachel walked through rooms that were starting to remember their purpose. The dining room, where refugees had shared meals. The studios, where artists had worked. The bedrooms, where families had found safety. The house was coming back to life, and with it, the stories it held. Dr. Hammond organized a preview event, inviting university board members, potential donors, and media to see the progress. Rachel gave tours, explained the history, showed documents and photographs. People were visibly moved, understanding the significance of what was being preserved. One board member, a wealthy businessman named Thomas Richardson, pulled Rachel aside afterward. How much does operation cost annually once you're open? Preliminary budget is $2 million. Staff, programming, maintenance, utilities. I'll endow that. $20 million. invested conservatively, generates $2 million annually. Consider it covered in perpetuity. Rachel stared at him, stunned. Why? Because this matters. Because stories like this need telling. Because I have money, and you're using yours to build something important. I want to help. More offers followed. Other donors committing funds for specific programs, offering expertise, volunteering time. The project was attracting support beyond what Rachel had imagined possible. By month 6, the memorial was recognizable as what it would become. The main house was structurally complete, interior work ongoing. The workshop had been converted to education center. The grounds were cleared and landscaped, gardens beginning to bloom. Signs were installed. The Samuel and Margaret Bernard Center for Historical Study, and the stories were being prepared. Dr. Rothstein had compiled oral histories from survivors and their descendants. Dr. Hammond had curated exhibits combining documents, photographs, and artifacts. The university had developed curriculum for bringing students to the center, teaching them about private resistance, individual courage, the power of ordinary people to make extraordinary difference. Ruth Adler returned to see the progress, moving slowly with her walker, but determined to witness restoration. Rachel gave her private tour, showing her the bedroom with yellow wallpaper that had been faithfully reproduced from Ruth's memories. It's exactly as I remember, Ruth whispered. The flowers, the border, everything. You helped us get it right. Your testimony guided the restoration. Ruth looked at Rachel with eyes that had witnessed 8 decades of history. Thank you for caring. Thank you for making sure we're remembered. So many people did nothing while we suffered. The Bernards did everything when we needed help. That deserves recognition. It does, and it will have it. Month 9 brought the first major media coverage. The New York Times ran a feature article, Forgotten Sanctuary Restored, How One Woman's Inheritance Revealed Hidden Holocaust History. The story went viral, shared across social media, picked up by national news. Rachel's phone rang constantly. Interview requests, donation offers, distant relatives suddenly interested in reconnecting. Morrison managed it all, shielding Rachel from overwhelming attention while ensuring productive engagement continued. The publicity had downsides, privacy lost, scrutiny increased, every decision analyzed publicly. But it also amplified the memorial's reach, educated millions about history they'd never known, inspired other preservation efforts. Rachel's family appeared in some coverage, though not the way they'd hoped. Several journalists investigated the inheritance dispute, uncovered Patricia and Michelle's attempts to challenge the will, and framed them as people who'd valued money over history. The resulting articles were unflattering, painting them as greedy relatives thwarted by Rachel's determination to honor her uncle's wishes. Patricia called once, voice tight with anger. You made us look terrible. I didn't make you anything. I told the truth. You challenged my inheritance because you wanted money. I protected it because I wanted to preserve history. Journalists drew their own conclusions. This has damaged my professional reputation. Then maybe you should have considered that before trying to take something that wasn't yours. They didn't speak again for months, and Rachel found she didn't miss the contact. Family was supposed to support you, but her family had only shown up when they thought there was profit in it. The real support had come from strangers Morrison, Walter, Dr. Hammond, James, the contractors and academics and donors who believed in the project. Month 12 marked major milestone. The house was complete, fully restored to 1,932nd appearance, updated systems hidden behind period-appropriate facades, ready to welcome visitors. The grounds were beautiful, gardens blooming, paths cleared, outbuildings converted to functional spaces. Dr. Hammond organized soft opening for donors, board members, and survivors. 70 people attended, including 3 individuals who'd actually stayed at the house during its sanctuary years. They were all in their 80s and 90s, frail but determined to witness restoration. One of them, a man named Thomas Kovacs, had stayed with his family in 1934 after his father lost factory work. He walked through the rooms with tears streaming down his face. "My childhood was defined by this place. We had nothing when we arrived. The Bernards gave us everything. My father found work because Samuel taught him skills, made connections, opened doors. Our entire lives were different because of what happened here." The grand opening was scheduled for month 18, June 15th. Rachel spent the final months ensuring every detail was perfect. Exhibits installed correctly, educational programs tested, staff trained, logistics arranged for handling hundreds of expected visitors. The night before opening, Rachel walked through the completed memorial alone. She paused in each room, remembering what it had looked like when she'd first arrived. The decay, the abandonment, the feeling that she'd inherited burden rather than gift. Now the house glowed with life and purpose. The dining room was set, as it would have been in 1935, table laid for 20, with period china and silverware. The studios contained easels and instruments, suggesting the creative work that had happened there. The bedrooms were furnished with careful attention to era and function. The library held the documented histories, accessible to researchers and students. And in the entry hall, a large plaque, the Samuel and Margaret Bernard Center for Historical Study, dedicated to preserving the memory of private sanctuary networks during the Great Depression and Holocaust. From 1931 to 1945, this house sheltered over 150 people who had nowhere else to go. Their stories remind us that individual actions matter, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that kindness persists even during darkness. May we honor their legacy by practicing similar courage in our own time. Rachel stood before that plaque, thinking about the journey from Oakland apartment to this moment. 18 months ago, she'd been counting her last $43, facing eviction, working 3 jobs. Now, she stood in a mansion she'd restored, director of a memorial that would educate thousands, steward of a legacy that would outlast her lifetime. The transformation wasn't just financial. Rachel had discovered capabilities she'd never known she possessed. Project management, leadership, public speaking, strategic planning skills developed through necessity but retained through practice. She was a different person than the exhausted woman who'd opened a broken clock to find a deed. But underneath the changes, something remained constant. The stubbornness that had kept her working 3 jobs. The determination that had driven her to search for hidden rooms. The belief that broken things could be fixed if you cared enough to try. That hadn't changed. That was still who she was. Her phone rang. "Morrison, last-minute update media coverage tomorrow will be extensive. All major networks, print journalists from 6 countries, estimated 500 attendees, instead of expected 200. Are you ready?" "I'm ready." "Rachel, you've done something remarkable here. Bernard would be proud." After they hung up, Rachel sat on the front porch steps, the same place she'd sat 18 months ago when the house had been abandoned and her future uncertain. The broken clock sat beside her, still frozen at 3:47, mechanism still exposed through the open back panel. She picked it up, examined it one final time. Bernard's note had been hidden behind those gears, the deed that changed everything. The first clue in a treasure hunt that had revealed not just gold, but purpose. Rachel had never fixed the clock's mechanism, never replaced the broken parts or set the hands moving. It remained frozen at 3:47, same as the day Bernard had left it to her. Some things were more valuable broken than repaired. Some stopped clocks told more truth than running ones. This clock had stopped at the moment Bernard died, freezing time until someone cared enough to look inside, to discover what patience concealed. Rachel would keep it frozen, display it in the memorial with explanation of its significance. Let visitors understand that hidden mechanisms sometimes matter more than surface function, that caring enough to investigate broken things could reveal extraordinary secrets. The morning of June 15th arrived clear and warm. By 9 a.m., people were already gathering. Media crews set up cameras. Visitors queued along the drive. Survivors arrived with their families, 3 generations, coming to honor the 4th that had saved them. Dr. Hammond coordinated everything with military precision. Scheduled speakers, managed crowds, ensured proper flow through exhibits. Rachel stood at the entrance, welcoming people, explaining the history, accepting gratitude she felt belonged to the Bernards rather than herself. At 10 a.m., the formal ceremony began. Dr. Hammond gave historical context. Dr. Rothstein explained the significance of documented evidence. Thomas Richardson discussed the importance of preserving humanitarian legacies. Then, Ruth Adler spoke, her thin voice amplified by microphone, but powered by 8 decades of memory. "I was 7 years old when my family came to this house," she began. "We had nothing. We'd fled Vienna with just the clothes we wore. America was supposed to be safe, but we quickly learned that safe was relative. People were suspicious of refugees, afraid we'd take jobs or bring foreign troubles. Most doors closed in our faces. But not this door. Samuel and Margaret Bernard welcomed us without question. They gave us rooms. They gave us food. They gave us dignity. More than anything, they gave us dignity. They treated us like people who mattered, not problems to be solved or charity cases to be pitied. We stayed 4 months. My parents recovered from trauma. My sister and I attended local school. My father found work with connections Samuel provided. By February, we were ready to leave, to start building our lives in America. But we never forgot what the Bernards did for us. This house saved us, not just physically, though that mattered, but emotionally, spiritually. It gave us back our humanity. It showed us that kindness still existed, that some people cared about strangers without expecting anything in return. I'm 91 years old now. I've lived a good life. Married, raised children, had grandchildren and great-grandchildren. All of that was possible because the Bernards gave my family sanctuary when we needed it most. I owe them everything. And I'm so grateful that this place will finally be recognized for what it was, a beacon of hope during the darkest times. When Ruth finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. The ceremony continued with other speakers, but Ruth's testimony had captured everything essential about what the memorial represented. Finally, Rachel spoke. She kept it brief, recognizing that the history mattered more than her role in preserving it. 18 months ago, my Uncle Bernard died and left me a broken clock. Inside that clock was a deed to this property. Inside this property was a history that had been hidden for 80 years. My uncle spent 40 years protecting that history, waiting for someone who'd care enough to continue his work. I'm grateful he chose me. But this isn't really about me or him. It's about Samuel and Margaret Bernard, who built something extraordinary. It's about the 150 people they helped. It's about the power of individual action to make a difference. We live in times when it's easy to feel powerless, when problems seem too large, too complex, too overwhelming for ordinary people to address. This memorial exists to remind us that's not true. Samuel and Margaret were ordinary people. They weren't wealthy philanthropists or government officials. They were regular folks who decided helping others mattered more than personal comfort. They couldn't solve all the world's problems, but they could shelter the people in front of them. They could provide meals, rooms, community. They could treat desperate people with dignity. And by doing that, one person at a time, they changed 150 lives. That's what I hope visitors take from this place. Not that you need massive resources to make a difference, but that you need to care. That's all. Just care enough to help the person in front of you. Do that consistently, and you change the world. She unveiled the plaque, officially opening the Samuel and Margaret Bernard Center for Historical Study. The crowd applauded. Media captured everything. Visitors began touring the exhibits. Rachel watched it all with a satisfaction she'd never experienced before. This was what wealth could build when deployed with purpose. Not luxury for herself, though she'd also bought a modest house in Millbrook, replaced her dying car, established financial security. But primarily, wealth had built this memorial, this education center, this testimony to the possibility of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The day blurred together in conversations, interviews, tours. By evening, Rachel was exhausted but fulfilled in ways she'd never known before. She'd spent her life feeling like she was failing, always behind, never enough. Now she'd succeeded at something that mattered. As the sun set, painting the mansion golden in fading light, Dr. Hammond found Rachel on the porch. The day exceeded every expectation. Over 600 visitors, media coverage that will reach millions, donations pledged that will fund operations for 5 years. You've built something extraordinary. We built it together. I just provided funding. You provided vision. That's rarer than money. Hammond paused. What comes next for you? Rachel pulled out her phone, showing notes she'd been accumulating, names of other potential preservation sites, forgotten histories waiting to be documented, humanitarian legacies that deserved recognition. There are other stories, other places like this. I want to find them, protect them, make sure people like the Bernards aren't forgotten. That's ambitious. I have resources now, and I've learned I'm capable of more than I thought possible. Why not use both to honor other histories? Hammond smiled. Then you'll need research assistance, academic partnerships, institutional support. I'd like to help. I'd appreciate that. They stood watching the last visitors leave, the memorial settling into evening quiet. Rachel thought about the journey from broken clock to this moment. About Bernard's trust, the Bernard's legacy, the 150 stories now preserved. But mostly she thought about what came next, because this wasn't ending, it was beginning. The memorial was complete, but the work of finding other forgotten histories, telling other important stories, honoring other legacies, was just starting. Rachel Chen was 33 years old. She had nearly $200 million, skills she'd developed through necessity, purpose that extended beyond herself, and determination forged through years of barely surviving. She wasn't the same person who'd opened a broken clock 18 months ago, desperately hoping for something, anything, to change. That person had been frozen like clock hands at 3:47, mechanism jammed, unable to move forward. But she'd taken that broken thing apart, discovered what time had hidden, fixed what needed fixing. Not the clock itself that would stay frozen, memorial to the moment everything changed, but herself. The internal mechanisms that had stopped working when exhaustion and despair had ground them down. She was running now, moving forward, time no longer frozen but flowing, carrying her toward a future she was actively building rather than passively experiencing. The memorial lights came on as darkness completed its arrival, illuminating the Samuel and Margaret Bernard Center for Historical Study. It stood beautiful and purposeful, testimony to courage during darkness, to kindness when kindness was rare, to the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And in her pocket, Rachel carried the key to the workshop where gold had waited, where Bernard's clocks still ticked their patient rhythms, where wealth had been hidden until someone cared enough to search. Some treasures were measured in millions, others were measured in stories told, histories preserved, legacies honored. Rachel had found both, and in finding them, had discovered herself. The broken clock knew time's deepest secret. Sometimes you had to stop, dismantle everything, examine what was hidden beneath surfaces, before you could move forward properly. Rachel had done that. Now, finally, she was ready for whatever time brought next. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.